Good afternoon. My name is Don Tonti Ploffel, and I'm the Associate Director of Academic Ventures and Engagement at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. At the start, please let me acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors tuned in this afternoon. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public. We thank you. It is my distinct honor and profound pleasure to welcome you to today's exciting event in our annual series, the Roosevelt Poetry Readings, which brings together poets of recognized stature to the Institute. I am especially gratified that today's reading and conversation will develop themes and reflections in a time when the promise and perils of protest, critical expression, meaningful uptake, and resistance in dialogue and in community are vividly evident. This is because earlier this academic year, we launched our new multi-year focus area on academic freedom and connecting across difference. This new initiative is our institute-wide, multidisciplinary, and multimodal effort to advance and generate insight and action concerning threats to free speech, civil discourse, intellectual exploration, and creative expression. One element of this initiative is to explore international experiences, perspectives, and themes related to open inquiry and free expression. At the heart of this work is Radcliffe's overarching commitment to supporting and sharing work that promotes innovative study, critical conversation, and greater equity. This reflects Radcliffe's bedrock commitment to interdisciplinary study and creative articulation, informed by an equally deep dedication to inclusion. We firmly believe that these approaches will generate valuable new insights into effective, equitable, and emancipatory ways of addressing many present challenges, including climate change and also threats to our intellectual and creative life, especially threats to the institutions and practices that support our intellectual and creative lives together. Today's Roosevelt Poetry Reading, given by our featured poet Ilya Kaminsky, followed by a conversation with Stephanie Sandler, brings into focus the Institute's emphasis on spotlighting work at the cutting edge of the arts and humanities. It will also, I believe, bring out questions of protest, its powers, its limits, speech and its negation, and also its sublimation, the role of silence as a form of resistance, the ways in which violence can itself be a cacophonous silencing. Ilya Kaminsky is professor of creative writing at the Lewis Center for the Arts at Princeton University. He is the author of Dancing in Odessa and Deaf Republic, and the co-editor and co-translator of many other works. Our discussant and moderator is Stephanie Sandler, the Ernest E. Monrad Professor of Slavic Languages and Literatures in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Her most recent book is The Freest Speech in Russia, Poetry Unbound, 1989 to 2022. A fuller list of our speakers' awards and publications, too long and impressive to recite here, is available via links on the Radcliffe website. Finally, on behalf of Professor Sandler, I encourage the audience here to use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions at any time during the program. Please keep your questions concise so that we can explore as many topics as possible. It is now my pleasure to give the virtual floor to our Roosevelt poet, Ilya Kaminsky.
Thank you so much, Dan, for creating this space for us and for welcoming us so kindly and generously. And thank you, Jessica, for helping with all the technical difficulties to make it accessible for everybody. It's very appreciated. It's really an honor to be in ongoing for many years now conversation with Stephanie Sandler, who to my mind is one of America's most important scholars and translators, really unpacking what it means for us, what it means to be a creative artist in Eastern Europe, and how sometimes the only way to respond is to poetry because so many other doors are not just closed, but burned down. So it's really an honor to be here in conversation with Stephanie. Having said that, I just want to thank you all for being here, and I'll read some poems. Because you might have noticed that I speak with a pretty heavy accent, there will be poems available on screen for you. Okay, the first poem I'll read is called "We Live Happily During the War." We lived happily during the war, and when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th year of the 6 months of a disastrous reign, in a house of money, in a street of money, in a city of money, in a country of money. Our great country of money. We, forgive us, lived happily during the war. So what I'm going to read from now is pages from a story in the Staff Republic, which begins with the scene of a pregnant woman and her husband, who at a public gathering see a soldier shoot and kill a young deaf boy. And in response to that murder, this is a whole community decide to stand up and protest the authorities by refusing to hear them. Deaf Republic. Gunshot. Our country is a stage. When soldiers march into town, public assemblies are officially prohibited. But today, neighbors flock to the piano music from Sonia and Alfonso's puppet show in Central Square. Some of us have climbed up into trees, others hide behind benches and telegraph poles. When Petya, the deaf boy in the front row, sneezes, the sergeant puppet collapses, shrieking. He stands up again, snorts, shakes his fist at the laughing audience. An army jeep swerves into the square, disgorging itself, and the sergeant disperse immediately. Disperse immediately. Puppet mimics in a wooden falsetto. Everyone freezes except Petya, who keeps giggling. Someone claps a hand over his mouth. The sergeant turns towards the boy, raising his finger. You! You! The puppet raises his finger. Then he watches her puppet. The puppet watches the sergeant watches Sonia and Alfonso. But the rest of us watch Petya lean back, gather all the feet in his row, and launching at the sergeant. The sound with an Anisfield lifts the gauze of the water. A soldier's march. Alfonso covers the boy's face with a newspaper. 14 people, most of us strangers, watch Sonia kneel by Petya shot in the middle of the street. She picks up his spectacles, shining like 2 coins, balances them on his nose. Observe this moment. How it convulses. Snow falls on the dog running through the streets like medics 14 of us watch. Sonia kisses his forehead. Her shadow hole torn in the sky. It shimmers the park benches, porch lights we see. In Sonia's open mouth, the nakedness of the whole nations. She stretches out beside the little snowman napping in the middle of the street. As picking up its spelling, the country runs. Alfonso in snow. You're alive, I whisper to myself. Therefore something in you listen. Something runs down the street, falls, fails to get up, I run, etc. With my legs and my hands behind my pregnant wife, etc. Down Wasenka Street I run, etc. It only takes a few minutes, etc. to make a mess. Darkness and insurgency begins. Our country woke up next morning and refused to hear soldiers. In the name of Peter, we refuse. At 6 a.m., when soldiers compliment the girls in the alleyway, the girls slide by, pointing to their ears. At 8, the bakery door is shut and soldiers Ivana face though he's their best customer. At 10, Mama Gala chokes, no one hears you, at the gates of the soldiers' barracks. By 11 a.m., arrests begin. Our hearing does not weaken, but something silent in us strengthens. After curfew, families of the arrested hung homemade puppets out of their windows. The streets empty, but for the squeaks of strings and the tap, tap against the buildings of wooden fists and feet. In the ears of the town, snow falls. Alfonso stands unswearable. My people, you were really something fucking fun on the morning of the first arrest. Our men, once frightened and bound to their beds, now stand up like human must. Daphnis presses through us like a police whistle. Here's an eye, testify. Each of us comes home, shuts at a wall, at a stove, at a refrigerator, let himself forgive me. I wasn't honest with you. Life, to you I stand answerable. I land, etc. With my legs and my hands, etc. Run down Wasenka Street, etc. Whoever listens. Thank you for the fodder on my tongue. Thank you for our arguments that end. Thank you for deafness, Lord, such fire from a match you never lit. That map of bone and opened it fast. I watched the sergeant tame, the deaf boy take iron and fire in his mouth. His face on the asphalt, that map of bone and open it valves. It is the air. Something in the air wants us too much. The earth is still. The table guards eat cucumber sandwiches. This first day, soldiers examine the ears of bartenders, accountants, soldiers. The wicked things dance to soldiers. They tear Cora's wife from her bed like a door of a fire. Observe this moment, how it convulses the body of the boy, lines of the asphalt like a paperclip. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like the body of a boy. I touch the walls, feel the pulse of the heart, and I study of wordless and do not know why I am alive. We tiptoe the city, Sonia and I, between theaters and guardians and wrought iron gates. Be courageous, we say, but no one is courageous. As a sound we do not hear lifts the birds of the water. Before the war, we made a child. I kissed a woman whose freckles arose the neighbors. She had a mole on her shoulder, which she displayed like a medal for bravery. Her trembling lips went down to bed. Her hair would have fallen in the middle of the conversation. When come to bed, I walked in my barber shop of thoughts. Yes, I leave her off to bed on the chair of my hairy arms, but parted lips went bite my parted lips lying under the cushion. So, yeah, thanks we did. Soldiers aimataat. They fire at the crowd of women, police, inside the nostrils of searchlights. My God, have a photograph of this. The piazza's bright air. Soldiers drag Peter's body and his head among the stairs. I feel through my wife's shorts the shape of our child. Soldiers drag Peter up the stairs on homeless docks. Then, as philosophers understand everything, I'm back. I want a breach with no camouflage of speech, a body, wrapping the body of my pregnant wife tonight. We don't die. I don't die. The earth is still. A helicopter I both my wife on earth. A man cannot flip a finger at the sky, because each man is already a finger flipped at the sky. Lullaby, lullaby. Little daughter, rain, water, snow, and branches protect you, whitewashed walls, and neighbor's hand. Oh, child of my empress, little lord of 6 pounds, my white hair keeps you asleep, lit, while the child sleeps. Sonia undresses. She scrubs me until I spit salty water big to smiles. A man should smell better than his country. Such is the silence of a woman who speaks again, silence known. That silence is what moves us to speak. She throws my shoes and glasses in the air. I'm of deaf people and I have no country but a bathtub and an infant and a marriage bed. Sopping together that is sacred to us, washing each other's shoulders. Anyone. But with whom can you see it in water? Boy, I'm bombardment. Boy, I'm bombardment. My body runs in a loam of street. My clothes in a pillowcase. I look for a man who looked exactly like me to give him my soda, my name, my shirt. It has begun. Neighbors climb the trolleys in the fish market, breaking all the moments in half. Trolleys parts like intestines in the sun. Pavel shots, I am so fucking beautiful, I cannot stand it. Two boys still holding tomato sandwiches, hop in a trolley slide. Soldiers same at their faces, their ears. I can't find my wife. Brains. My pregnant wife, a body, an adult male awaits to explode like a hand grenade. It has begun. I see the blue canary of my country. Big breadcrumbs from each citizen's size. Big breadcrumbs from my neighbor's hair. The snow leaves the earth and falls straight up as it should. To have a country. So important to run into walls, into streetlights, into loved ones as one should. The blue canary of my country runs into walls, into streetlights, into loved ones. The blue canary of my country watches their legs as they run and fall. A cigarette. A cigarette. Watch. Vasenka citizens do not know. They are evidence of happiness. In a time of war, each is a ripped out document of a laughter. Watch. God, they have something to tell that not even they can hear. Clamber roof in the center square of this bombed out city, you will see one neighbor zips a cigarette, another gives the dog a pint of solid beer. You will find me, God, like a dumb pigeon's beak I am pecking every which way at astonishment. Firing squad, firing squad. On balconies, sunlight. On poplars, sunlight. On our lips, today, no one is shooting. I go, catch her hair with imaginary scissors, the scissors in sunlight. Her hair in sunlight. Another go, nicks a pair of shoes from a sleeping soldier's covered with light. A soldier's wake, and gape at us, gaping at them. What does they see? Tonight, they shot 50 women at Lorna Street. I sit down to write and tell you what I know. A child learns the world by putting it in her mouth. The girl becomes a woman, and a woman her body. They blame you for all them, and they seek in the body. For does not live in the body. The townspeople watch them take a photo. Now, each of us is a witness stand. Vasenka watches us watch for soldiers row Alfonso Brabinski on the sidewalk. We let them take him, all of us, covers. But we don't say. We carry in our suitcases, our coat pockets, our nostrils. Across the street, they watch him with fire hoses, for he screams and he stops so much sunlight. A t-shirt falls off a clothesline, and an old man stops, picks it up, presses it to his face. Neighbors line up to watch him drown on the sidewalk like a vaudeville actor. In so much sunlight, each of us is a witness stand. They take Alfonso, and no one stands up. Our silence stands up for us. Okay. I'm just going to read one more poem, which will bring it a lot closer home. It is called In a Time of Peace. In a Time of Peace. Inhabitant of Earth, for 40-some years, I once found myself in a peaceful country. I watch the neighbors open their phones to watch a car, demanding a man's driver license. And when a man reaches for his wallet, the cop shoots into the car window. Shoots. It's a peaceful country. We pocket our phones and go to the dentist to pick up the children from school to buy shampoo and bathe them. Ours is a country in which a boy shot by police lies on the pavement for hours. We see in his open mouth the nakedness of the whole nation. We watch others watch. The body of a boy lies on the pavement exactly like the body of a boy. It is a peaceful country, and it clips our citizens' bodies effortlessly, the way the president's wife trims her toenails. All of us still have to do the hard work of dentist appointments, of remembering to make a summer salad. Basil, tomatoes, it is a joy. Tomatoes and a little salt. This is a time of peace. I don't hear gunshots, but watch the birds flash over the backyards of the suburbs. How bright is the sky as the avenue spins on its axis. How bright is the sky. Forgive me. How bright. Thank you.
That was so beautiful, Ilya. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to hear you read. And one of the things that is so striking for me, having read the whole book and heard you read other times as well, is how powerfully it excerpts. So just by pulling a few poems from Deaf Republic, you've really recreated the whole world of the book for our audience. And we're really all in your debt. I wonder if we could begin with the first line of the first poem that you read, after We Lived Happily During the War, which I'll loop back to in a minute. But Gunshot begins with the phrase, "Our country is the stage." So I'd love to ask about both our country and the stage. Our country, that first person plural, is that the same we of We Lived Happily During the War, or the we that we hear in other places toward the end, the we who watch? Who are we? Who are the we that you are imagining in creating this beautiful book?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's always an honor to be in conversation with you, Stephanie, and I truly mean this. And because this news answer will have to be far more complicated. Of course, because of your mind, but also because of your background, knowing more than one poetic tradition. So I will start with the book itself and then maybe move a little more towards traditions. In a book, the tension between I and we is something that's very much the arc of the story in many ways. It begins with forgive us on the first page and ends with forgive me on the final page. And also just to give the readers a context for those who have not read the book. So we have a story with larger than life characters. Sonia, Alfonso, Mama Galia, who is not in this handout that I shared, but very much in the book. Mama Gali is a leader of the revolt, a leader of protest, by far my favorite character in the book, in fact. And they are larger than life. They die in the book to protest in very different ways. Along those individuals, those heroes, there is a we of the town that begins very positively, a positive protest, a protest of deafness as something that's positive, that is creative. And as we go on, we see the transformation. We see the other side of the we, of the collective. The we that is watching as other people are doing terrible things, as terrible things have been done to them, and does nothing. And that is a part of that we, to which perhaps the author, the speaker, through the writing of the poems, realizes that they belong to, not necessarily the heroes, but those who stand and do nothing. So there is this kind of a progression, not necessarily defining it, but questioning it. And now, speaking of the backgrounds, because you have studied Russian poetry and East European poetry and translated poetry from different generations, so much you know that the idea of we in that part of the world, and of course, because like me, you live here in America, in our part of the world, the we changes so much, both in the real world and in the poetry world. In Soviet Union, the we was, of course, the we of the country, the big propaganda we. And of course, the poets used to question it, to poke it, because it was fake. Whereas in America, at least in the 90s when I came in, I found that American writers were also isolated from the community. Really not having the community so much in the 90s. Just look at the ZDF TV, our favorite TV show was the Seinfelds, a kind of the ironic community, right? The irony, and so forth. And then over time, the idea of it changed, and we had so many social movements when we became very big. And now we are watching exactly the opposite in many ways. We are watching, say, social media, Twitter, with the big capitalism coming in, and what we thought was perhaps a positive coming in, we realize that no, it also becomes propaganda. You have somebody like Mark coming in and buying it out. So we is constantly changes of what we mean by it, what I mean by it. So for me, it was not necessarily my declaration of what it is, but my questioning who I am in it, perhaps.
It's striking in your answer. I was going to ask you about the creation of Vasinka as a place, but I'm hearing in your answer that in a way the creation of that place allowed you to create a we that was capacious enough to include both the we of America in the We Lived Happily During the War, which references the US, as does your final poem, and then a place name like Vasinka, which sounds very much from Russia. In fact, it sounds like a child's name. And it's one of the things that gives that quality of tenderness to the poem, which I think is so important. The rest of that sentence, our country is the stage, makes me want to ask about the role of the stage, the theater. I peeked at the questions in the Q&A and I saw that somebody was asking already about the image of the puppets. So could you say a bit about the role of theater, of the fact of the puppet show, and of the idea of the stage? Is it meant to encompass performance, watching? What are the elements that drew you to that as an image in this story?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. There again would be more than one answer, and again coming more blame ping pong between where I come from and where I live now. And it's not really a literary ambition. it simply would be dishonest to write as an American because I had never heard lullabies in American English. My first love poems were not in American English. So it's part of who I am is evolving, and only a part of it is American. But then I'm certainly not Ethiopia because I live in America for the last 30 years. So I had to do a kind of a fabulist, a fairy tale, a hybrid genre, simply because the receiving genre couldn't accommodate this more than one narrative that one is a part of. And to just pick one narrative would be fake. So in that way, having to create a world is simply because I have no choice. I don't belong fully to one or the other. It has to be a blend. Just by virtue of history. It's not my invention, unfortunately, or fortunately, history is not my invention. But stages, of course, you know, we have famous Shakespeare quote, right? The world is a stage, so I didn't make it up. I would add, in regards to puppets, there's a long history of puppetry, both in Eastern Europe, with Petrushka and so on, all the way to Karel Čapek, a great Czech writer who, during the World War II, was only writing puppet plays and only for finger puppets, because to his mind, and that's, remember, the long 5 Years of War, a writer who was very prolific, who created the word robot for us. He made a decision to write plays for finger puppets because people could perform them in the street. And if soldier walks by, they can literally put a hand in their pocket. And the performance was gone. That kind of subversiveness. And of course, the puppetry in itself is a very subversive genre, a street genre, a carnival. But we had it in America as well. We had, in your part of the world, closer to Massachusetts, we have Bread and Puppet in Vermont, who is one of the wonders of American art, if you will. Fully political, but fully medieval, if you will, really exploring that art. But we also had situations like in Seattle during the Iraq War. People wanted to protest. The protests were not allowed, so they staged literally a puppet show on a sidewalk, and they got arrested for it. They got arrested for staging a puppet show on a sidewalk in the United States, in Seattle. So again, there are so many echoes in between the two. But for me, this kind of hybrid genre, it's not because I wanted to be innovative or creative for the sake of being innovative or creative. I literally was viscerally out of need searching for a form that would allow me not to hide parts of my history. And there are echoes between, even in the poems I read, there are echoes in between American poems and fairy tale poems that are speaking more towards Eastern Europe. And they have to be, because otherwise I would be lying.
The way you answered the question about theater and puppetry really speaks to the theme of resistance in the book and the forms of resistance that go beyond words. I want to ask also a slightly different question, which I see is echoed by a question that someone has posed in the Q&A about the phrase, forgive us. That movement from forgive us to forgive me, you noted it earlier, Ilya, in your answer to me. And there's also a line in an Alfonso poem where he has the line, forgive me, I was not honest with you. So that motif of forgiveness is in several spots. Could you speak a bit about that, about what role it is playing? Does it speak to God? There's another question in the Q&A, actually several, about theological implications of the text. Is that the direction in which it is pointing? Maybe this is not either or, but is it also a human request for forgiveness
I don't necessarily have, I don't organize my books by philosophy goes here, theology goes here, poetry goes here. I organize them by the kind of bits of language I like. So similarly, I don't necessarily think theological answers and ethical answers are different.
Mhm.
You have Levinas, after all, who told us that they're the same, Emmanuel Levinas. We have poets like Celan or Edmund Jabas, who are they writing out of history, or are they writing psalms for the 20th century or now 21st, perhaps? So I don't necessarily divide it into different categories. Um, of course, one is taught into what we would call God or planet Earth or whatever religion that we have made up or will make up for it, but we're taught into something that's larger than us. We also taught into a community that by definition is larger than us, but also allows us to, or maybe makes us not be fully present. And I wanted the reader to be a participant in the book. I wanted the reader to think, oh, okay, he made that fairy tale, that burlesque of somewhere exotic and far away, and I'm going to be entertained and horrified, and then I'll go home nicely. And I didn't want them to go home nicely. I wanted them to realize that they're one of the actors, like I am one of the actors. So the reader should be a part of that we, just as the author is a part of that we, because the author is also a reader. Um, that is partly why you didn't see it in the handouts for those who haven't read the book, but in the book there is also sign language signs, and the community wants to make up those signs, wants to make up that language. So at first you're given a sign and a little subtitle underneath it, and then some of the signs. Oh, thank you, thank you.
So there's an example. It was one of the things also I wanted to ask you about, so thank you for mentioning it. But please go ahead.
Yes, so there are some of the signs, and some of them are even repeated as if you're trying to learn them. But by the end, in the final page, you're given a little, not necessarily a poem, but like a koan or a little proverb or something like that, that is without the subtitles, because the reader have already seen the signs and will know what they mean. And the idea is, yeah, you learn that those few signs, but you really are becoming a part of that town by learning the language of the town. That was the hope. Who knows if I actually accomplished that, but that was the hope. So I was trying to make more than one way of for the reader to be a part of that town, and not necessarily to be comfortable in it, because it's not a comfortable town. And of course, for me personally, it was not a comfortable town. Some of the hardest poems to write were the poems of bombardment. One of the poems I read, the longer poem of bombardment, I spent the whole day writing it. I didn't write any other poems there, simply because it wasn't fun. Um, so that kind of process, I guess. I don't know if I answered the question, but my main takeaway is I don't necessarily recommend separating theology and ethics. It never works.
And similarly, I wonder if you're not recommending separating out our sensory functions. So in the poem that you read, which did have one of the signs, the sign for the town, I believe the line of poetry referred to the ears right above it, and the hands almost look like the ears on the side of the face, the way that it's shaped. The senses really integrate in our reception of your work, and partly that's also because you make it a habit to project the text so that we see what the text looks like on the page, quite apart from the signs, and our eyes take it in as much as our ears take in the sounds of the words. But then the hands, of course, are tactile as well. It's as if we're touching that. You said that you didn't want the reader to just go off comfortably. And I want to just stay with that for 1 minute, because it also seems to me that you are very committed in this painful book, which was hard for you to write, as you say, and is at times hard for us to read. You're committed to elements of beauty and love and tenderness. In the beautiful lullaby poem that you read to us, or in the We Make a Baby poem, those punctuate the book, or the line in another text that you read of citizens as evidence of happiness. Could you speak a bit about the role of that? I don't know what else to call it, but a tone, which feels to me like it's so important in your work. I mean, it's in Dancing in Odessa. It feels to me like it's in everything that you've written.
Thank you. Thank you so much for mentioning that. It's probably the most important in some ways, for me anyway, part of the book. And since you mentioned Dancing in Odessa, thank you for mentioning it. There is my father's is in both of these books. His story is very much a story of a stolen baby. He was a stolen baby. My grandfather, his father was shot in 1937, and his birth mother was put into Siberia for over a decade. He was stolen. His siblings had to go to orphanage. And the woman who adopted him, she was Christian, via Jewish. She allowed him to stay Jewish. During the World War II in Odessa, she hid him for over 4 years of the war when Odessa was occupied. And she was a young boy. She was born in 1937. The war in Odessa began in 1941. He was being hid until middle of 1944. So she had to keep that young kid occupied for so long in a closed room. And one day he ran away. He got bored. He got into the stage, and she shared with him always because, I have dark hair. Jews tend to have dark hair in that part of the world. Slavic people usually have lighter hair. So it's very easy to identify one in the street. And so the soldiers saw him. I don't know if it was German soldier or Romanian soldier, because Odessa was also occupied by Romanians. But the soldiers saw him and so ran after him, and he hid behind the tomatoes, the box of tomatoes. And he got saved that way. And, my friends always say, oh, you have so many tomatoes, you could have read another tomato poem. And I didn't know why, but at the end I realized that was very much why. Not just trying to go for central links, but because central links are the only survival mechanism we have. And coming back to now, I go to Ukraine a couple of times a year. And there is, people have poetry readings, people have dance, people have parties, even as there are air silence. It's a real story. I keep telling this to people because in some ways that illustrates very, very much what you're talking about. So there's bombardment at night. In the morning, I'm talking to my uncle. My uncle is over 80 years old, very active, has way more energy than I do. He started a tenants union in his apartment building during the war. So a lot of energy. And he calls me and we're talking, and I'm like, well, do we need to talk about what just happened? We were bombed last night. You're like, no, we don't need to talk about it. We need to go for breakfast. And I'm like, wait, and she's like, you know what we need to talk about? I'm like, what? And she's like, that some people have to go to work in the morning. That kind of energy of survival, of going out for ice cream, despite it all. And when we talk about things like invasion and TV or in public in America, in a more comfortable, so to speak, environment, we usually say horror, horror, horror. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And people, of course, we need to talk about it to catch attention. But as you know, after 3 years of this ongoing full-scale invasion and over 10 years of the actual conflict, people go numb. They can't take it anymore. We can see it with the current election. You know, when Trump first got elected all those years ago, we were all protesting. Now, so many people are just numb because how much of a terrible stuff can you take? And I realized that talking about not just horror, but how people survive it, the survival mechanisms, the lullabies, the singings, the tone, as you mentioned it, of the daily stuff, what allows us to climb out of it, is just as important, maybe even more important, because it prevents us from drying up. Otherwise, we just dry up.
It's such an important answer to the question, Ilya, and it loops back to what you were saying earlier about ethics, because one could hear the poem "We Lived Happily During the War" as if it were a cynical condemnation of people who, it's a grotesque idea that you could find happiness, as if you were ignoring the horror of war. But in the process of this book and in your answer to the question, what you offer instead is a much more humane and loving sense of how, in our weakness as humans, we have the capacity to resist, we have the capacity to fight, but we also need our connections to other people and those acts of love which keep us alive. It helps me also understand your turn to narrative in this book. So even though there are elements of narrative in Dancing in Odessa, here you really tell a story, and from start to finish, and that it helps me understand the value of turning to that story, because it allows you those pockets of those different moments, those different tones, to balance that also with the different characters that you create.
Hopefully, who knows?
It's not really a question, but I think I want to just turn to a few of the many good questions that are in the Q&A. One which is really quite different, and I know people will be interested in the answer to this question. Someone is asking about other poets whom you read the most. This person also thanks you for writing what we need to hear. So your work is certainly invaluable, but it's a chance to think about other people whom you're reading, whom you think the audience might want to turn to.
Gives me a chance to talk about the collections that come out now a couple of years ago, but still relatively new, called In the Arab War, Poetry from Ukraine. It has many poets in it. Let me put that again. Some of those poets are super famous, rock star famous, more than rock star famous, and some of them are completely unknown. People haven't heard the names even in Ukraine. And that was, I co-edited it with a wonderful poet, Carolyn Porcher. And it was a lucky event for me to be in conversation with Carolyn about the work. And we really wanted to bring the different ranges of society, from geographical and class perspective, from and fame perspective, really, to bring in some poets' audience, or take some poets who are already known and show them from a different perspective. So I would recommend reading these poets because, you know, really many of them wrote poems in the book since the full-scale invasion. Some of those poems are what you would call a modern classics. They're from 80s, but you see them in an entirely different light from the current situation. What poets I was reading when I was writing the book for Deaf Republic, because for Dancing, just all the poems are already about those poets. But for Deaf Republic, it is hard to say simply because the book took such a long time. There are writers I go back to a lot. There are writers who I discovered and knew in a process, and I'll talk about some of them. I go back to Shakespeare a lot, simply because it's a lot of fun. It is always a ride, and my English changes. It's the Shakespeare I read in high school, and the Shakespeare I read 30 years later is very different. Also, the Shakespeare I read when I was reading Pasternak's translation was very different, because I grew up in Pasternak Shakespeare. Pasternak Shakespeare was actually, probably still is in some ways, and people will probably be very surprised to hear it, but far more moving for me. Simply because Pasternak is closer in time. So when I'm reading somebody that is writing in a language that my parents speak, in a language that's not removed by several centuries, it is very moving. When I read Lear in English, when I teach it, I admire it tremendously. I'm moved by it, but I don't necessarily weep. When I read Pasternak's Lear, yeah, I weep, and I'm not a weepy person. So that was kind of a lucky thing to be so close in translation to a classic. One book I can tell you that I wish I have read during the writing of Deaf Republic that I didn't was Brecht, Mother Courage. I hated myself for not reading that earlier because it would probably speed up the process of writing the book by 5 years at least. He really figured it out against himself, because Brecht was a true believer. He was truly a proletarian writer, and he wanted Mother Courage to be bad. He wanted her to be a war profiteer. And you can see how in the beginning of the book, this character who follows the army and sells them and profits from war is losing her children, and how we fall in love with her by watching her grief for her beloveds. And Brecht, against himself, wrote a book against his own propaganda out of love. Very Brechtian play, if you will. And I wish I read it earlier, because it would have helped me to write the book. There are so many others. I grew up on Isaac Babel, coming from Odessa, so Babel is still a huge influence. Kadlerievsky Enida, probably the most interesting to me Ukrainian classic, because it really shows how to have fun with classics. She's really doing a mock epic. And I don't know if the parts of it I have seen in English translation. I don't know if the whole thing is translated. I hope people will translate it. But I also read a lot of American poets. I mentioned Carolyn Forshaw, who I studied with. So she was a big influence. So many other poets. One poet who was incredibly influential, I will say a particular poem, probably the most interesting to me American epic, is Robert Hayden's Middle Passage. Middle Passage was very important for my writing of Deaf Republic, simply because he does a kind of montage, collage, and not just collage of fragments, but collage of different registers of language. So you have 17th century language there. You have slaveholder diaries, which is horrific document that you read and write in the poem, and he sets it to read them. You have enslaved people songs. She has a narrative, she has dramatic monologues, and all of it is in a very compact, very rhythmical poem. So that was very instructive to read and very moving. And the other interesting thing is that poem, Middle Passage, is very much in conversation with T.S. Eliot, Wasteland. He loved Eliot. And so you can overhear some rhythms, and I taught both together. And it was fascinating because students read Eliot's Wasteland, and they know it's a very important text, they love it, but then they read Middle Passage, and you really see how emotionally how huge emotional impact. And that is, for me as a teacher, was a very instructive thing to see as well.
Thank you so much. I see the appearance of Don suggests to me that unfortunately we have to stop, and I can tell that there could be so much more to say. Thank you, Ilya.
Thank you so much, and I hope people look for your book, Stephanie, that just came out this year, The Freest.
Thank you.
Russia.
I think Don wants to sign us off.
Thank you both. This concludes our program today. I want to thank Professor Ilya Kaminsky for your evocative and powerful reading, and both Ilya and Professor Stephanie Sandler for the illuminating conversation, and you, our audience, and for the excellent questions. Today's program has been recorded and will be posted on the Radcliffe website in about a week. For information about Radcliffe programs and to see our videos of past events, please visit radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today, and take care.